we can have our own regulations, our own legal framework, our own courts, and also our own police. And that enables us to step backwards and basically ask ourselves the question, how would the ideal governance structure look like? In Próspera, it's on average 1,000 times cheaper to go to markets in biotech versus the US. People ask me, well, how do you know you can trust the individual to figure things out in the market? When I say, well, I don't trust the government because I don't trust the individual. The government is just a bunch of individuals that have misaligned incentives with me. At least I'm an individual that has misaligned incentives with me. At least that's something, right? The insurance companies are thinking ahead, right? When we have the AGI 3.0, we will already have the data points from AGI 2.0 and 1.0 and whatever, and we'll know what the risks are. So the model developers have incentive to prove to the insurance companies that they are safe. And
welcome everyone to Audio Tokens episode 11. I have Lonis with me today. Lonis is the VP of Growth of Próspera, which is a city in Honduras, which is kind of a specific economic zone, which has its own regulations and laws, and you can do a bunch of stuff there which you can't do in other places. I am sure this explanation is really bad, and Lonis is going to make a really, really good one very soon. Lonis was before a startup person, did a bunch of startups. The Pict is one thing he was part of, a startup in Sweden, and then he did God Mode, which went kind of viral. But then on his way to San Francisco to be an even bigger startup person in the city of San Francisco, he stopped at Próspera and fell in love with the place, and now he's there and working as the VP of Growth, as I said. Welcome to the pod, Lonis. And do you want to explain better what Próspera is?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, as you say, Próspera is the world's only free city in the world, in modern history even. So it's basically a special economic zone, as you said, but with very high level of legal freedom, such that with a few exceptions, especially around criminal law, but with those exceptions aside, we can have our own regulations, our own legal framework, our own courts, and also our own police. And so that enables us to basically be able to basically take a step backwards and basically ask ourselves the question, how would the ideal governance structure look like? How would the ideal laws look like, from the perspective of people and businesses, and then work backwards from there and figure out how we should structure everything.
What are some other economic zones, and how does Próspera differ from them? I think like Hong Kong and other are brought up in these discussions.
Yeah, I think in the world there are around 5.5 thousand different special economic zones. So almost all of them are just simple zero tax zones or like zero tariff zones for importations, for instance. So they are not really having any innovation in terms of the in terms of the governance framework as a whole. So what makes Próspera unique is that it's a full stack legal autonomy. So again, it's not just a small tax thing. We can make our own regulation in a much deeper way. I guess as you say, like you could think of Próspera versus Honduras in the same way you can think about Hong Kong versus China. So Hong Kong is obviously part of China; it's not a country of its own, but it has its own regulatory system, its own police court, all of that. And so I guess Próspera is similar in that sense.
Okay, and so high level picture, like if I move there, like how will I experience life differently from living in the US or somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, so the most glaring thing is that it's much smaller currently. We have a few dozen buildings and a few hundred people here, growing super fast. When I was here, we were I think less than 200, and now we are about 300 people. So we're growing really rapidly, but from a low baseline. So that's the biggest difference, right? But the more kind of subtle differences, especially if you're doing business in traditionally regulated industries like biotech, crypto, fintech in general, construction, energy, is that you have a very different regulatory system to work with. So in the EU and in the US, when you work in these traditional regulated industries, you're used to dealing with the FDA or the Fed or the SEC or the NRC or the FTC. And all these agencies that basically have monopoly power and say, you can do this, you say yeah or nay to anything. And oftentimes they're doing it in very unpredictable ways. I know many crypto founders who were afraid of continuing to work just because at any point the SEC could just knock at their door and say they did something illegal. And so we don't have that. The entire paradigm doesn't exist in Próspera around these type of agencies. What we have instead is that we have basically one simple regulation for these types of situations. And that regulation is that we require these types of businesses to have insurance. So they have insurance coverage. And so essentially, instead of having a monopoly regulator, like the SEC or the Fed, we have a market of insurance providers. And each insurance provider then looks into each company. Let's say you're developing a new drug or whatever, and they determine, is this a safe thing? If it's not safe, they will not give it a policy, insurance policy, obviously, because if someone sues them, if they screw up, then they have to pay up, right? So insurance company doesn't want to be on the hook for losing money. So they become the kind of experts. And so this decentralizes the system a lot. And to kind of give a concrete example of the outcome of that is in Próspera, it's on average 1,000 times cheaper to go to market in biotech versus the US. So in the US today, it can cost on average $300 million to only in the FDA licensing fees alone. So let's say you're a startup and you raise a $3 million seed round. That's 1% of everything you will have to pay to the FDA alone. Don't count not counting the science costs.
Yeah,
exactly. And so that leads to this massive invisible graveyard of potential drugs that could have been developed, but that aren't currently. And so that's very different to Próspera, where you can do it for on the order of $300,000. This is 3 orders of magnitude difference in cost, and maybe 30x difference in time.
Right. Okay. And where does that cost difference come from? Because like still, if you want it to be, I assume you. So is the safety requirement still as high in Próspera as in the US, but it's more efficient, or what is the pitch there?
Yeah. So the cost delta comes from basically insurance companies. Two things. One is that they are better at navigating risk typically than big regulators, and so they do a better risk benefit trade off. That's the main thing, and then also that there's a competition that drives down the cost over time. You can't take as much surplus. You can have as much margin. So currently, insurance companies definitely want to see phase 1 safety trials, right? So in FDA, you have this, the phase 1 safety trial, and then the phase 2 and phase 3, which are efficacy and not safety. And so typically insurance companies still want to see a safety trial before they give you a policy, but they care less about efficacy. That's more up to the market to figure out, and also to independent kind of third-party, let's say, stamp providers or trademark providers that can give you a trademark of saying that, okay, this is not only safe, this is efficient as well. But it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to prove it before you go to market.
Okay. Wait, so in the US, only 1 out of the 3 phases of the trials are related to safety, and the rest are just like performance of the drug?
Correct. And what's even worse is that the first trial is by far the cheapest one, and the phase 2 and phase 3 are more expensive and aren't
Right.
focused on safety. It's focused on efficacy.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay,
so
interesting.
basically, the way to think about it is basically, and also you don't only have to prove efficacy, you also have to prove that it is better than anything else on the market. So if even if you prove safety and you prove efficacy, but you don't prove that it's better than any other drug on the market currently, you still can't distribute it. You have to prove that it's better than anything else. Which that's like saying in the tech world, like you can't, if you want to compete with Facebook, your V1 has to be better than Facebook. If it's as good as Facebook, you can't ship it. So obviously, this kills any type of startup. And so typically, big pharma doesn't have a problem with this FDA setup because it's a great way to protect against competition from startups and others.
And also, it's up to the government to decide what is better, which is
Correct. Yeah.
which is maybe not the the
Correct.
best judge in this kind of things.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. I think I want to dive deeper into this way of like how insurance like you have to put some requirements on the insurance, I guess. It's just like when you say like they have to be safe or whatever, is there some framework to decide what kind of things they need to cover? Because like I can't go and get any insurance, like I
Sure.
can't get like insurance for my car, and then suddenly I'm allowed to have like a
Sure.
biomedicine plant.
yeah, the insurance has to cover specifically. It's a liability insurance, or like it's an insurance to cover liabilities from the party you're insuring. And so, from the insurance provider's perspective, you have to be an insurance provider. Therefore, to be able to be an insurance provider and provide a policy for a party, you have to prove that you have enough capital to be able to actually cover damages, right? So you can start an insurance company tomorrow if you have 10 bucks in the bank account. You have to have enough money so you're actually able to cover damages and also incentivized to actually care about the risk reward trade-off.
And in terms of like edge cases, does your insurance have to cover every single possible edge case, or is there some gray zone here?
Yeah, I guess how do you mean?
So okay. You sometimes can get insurance for
Yes,
like 99% of the outcomes of your drug. But like
sure.
ensuring the like final 1% maybe it's like astronomically more expensive. Could you get
Right.
away with only getting the 99%, or it has to like cover everything?
Right. Well, it's like what the policy would say is basically if someone sues you and you get and they win the case and they get an award of 100K or whatever, um, then yeah, the insurance company has to cover some of that. So it's a liability insurance in terms of the potential damages that the drug potentially, for instance, could result in. And so this, if there are unintended things, so it's not like it covers specific outcomes. It covers damages as a more holistic category.
Mm. And what if these damages are like much bigger than any bag of money can cover? Like, I don't know, like it's a doom scenario. You cause the entire human species to go under or something. What, like,
Yeah.
surely no insurance can cover that. How do you like make sure that these cases are nevertheless regulated?
Yes. Well, so basically, for different categories of industries, there are different amounts of capital that the insurance company have to prove that they have before they can give an insurance policy. So if you have if you have an insurance company, you have $1 million, let's say, in capital, then you're able to insure maybe a new small drug, like a new longevity drug. But you might not be able to insure a new nuclear power plant, for instance. For that the potential damage of that is higher, so then you would have to have 1 billion
Mm,
on your balance sheet instead, let's say.
mm.
So those numbers, I don't have them in my head, but they are public on the website. So you can see roughly what the capital requirements is for different industries.
Mm. Okay. And then if you go to the other part of the spectrum, like the like small things that you would never sue anyone for, but like they accumulate over time. Like specifically, I have in mind in the US, for example, and you don't have as strict regulation on like stuff like food stuff like you have in Europe, and you can like compare the amount of ingredients in two different things, or like same things in different continents, and you see like the labels are much longer on the US one. But I would never sue anyone. Like I like that Europe has regulated that so I can go around and feel safe, but I would never sue the government or like any company because I slowly accumulated a bunch of bad stuff in my diet. How does this address this problem?
Yeah, well, I think so. What you're looking for there is basically some form of label or certificate that says that the food is adheres to certain standards, right? And so how this works for fair trade is that there's a fair trade trademark, right? So if you have fair trade, you can prove that by having this third party non-governmental entity say that we can certificate. We have the certificate that says that this is it's been produced with reasonable procedures and whatever. So the same thing you can have with anything else, including with health, right? Currently, it's partly done with, if you go to Whole Foods, you expect a certain amount of quality versus if you go to Walmart, for instance. And so currently it's done on the store level to some extent, but it could also used be done on the individual product level via these individual certificates. And we're already seeing that happening here in Próspera to some extent. So since we don't, so for instance, in the US, they have this procedure where they have IRBs, like institutional review boards, which look at drugs before they are put on the market. from a kind of reviews, ethical perspective and whatever. We don't in the US, for instance, that's by law, right? You have to go through the IRB. In Próspera, that's not by law. And as long as you have insurance coverage, you're fine. However, there are IRBs springing up in Próspera currently as a way to kind of give more as a way to kind of give certificates to specific drugs. So the drug producer can say, look, we didn't need that, go through the IRB, but we chose to. And now as a consumer, I can feel more safe because I can look at the stamp and say, okay, they went through the IRB. So there are many ways of kind of giving this signal, because it's a useful signal, but there are many ways to provide a signal to consumers. It doesn't have to be via the government.
Yeah. I guess this puts a lot of responsibility on the individual, which I like. Generally, I do like. It's freedom to do whatever you want with your body is generally a good thing. I guess one there's like one issue I have with this case though is that there's like a information mismatch. There's like a asymmetry basically, that you can put a label that, oh, my stuff is really good, but there's no way of like communicating that this product, even though it's the cheapest one, it's really bad for you, so you shouldn't pick it. And like maybe like the competitor can like put on their label like, don't pick our competitor because our competitor is like super unhealthy for you. But yeah, I think there's like a mismatch in how that information would be translated. Is that yeah? How do you solve that?
Well, so at least for me, like I can see if you look at the label that is if you look at a few product and you recognize the label and then you see one product that's much cheaper, it doesn't have a label. Typically, you wouldn't assume that it has the same qualities that the product with the label has that you trust, and so it's always hard to say like something is bad for you or not bad for you. I mean, is milk bad for you? There are many things we eat that we wouldn't eat in our hunter-gatherer environment, and so it is this sliding scale, right? And so are most things not done with fair trade? Yeah, I mean, if you buy the fair trade, then you can be quite sure that it's done with reasonable procedures. If you aren't buying with fair trade, currently we're not saying this was done with with people having this wage or this whatever.
Yeah.
We already kind of accept that we don't know all of everything that happens in the background, and so but still people kind of self-adjust over time typically.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's like no lower bound of how bad you can be if there's no regulation. Basically, like you can like your product, like you have two products. One
Yes.
uses 10% child labor. One product uses 70% child labor. None of them
Yes.
will get the label that they are child labor free, but obviously one of them is much better. And like you can have the same with like some chemical or like something that is bad for your health. Like you have
Sure.
two products, one has a little bit of it, one has a lot of it. And there's no like, how do you communicate that there is actually a scale here? If
Yeah.
the only way of communicating stuff like this is with labels for goodness, basically, is my
Yes. So two thoughts there. So one is, currently the government is the labeler. This is this monopoly labeler, and it typically makes the judgment to say that, at some percentage, right, of child labor in this case, we won't allow it or whatever. And the thing with the free market though is that you can create a higher diversity of labels. So you can have you expect different quality from your iPhone versus Samsung versus your LG phone or whatever, right? You have different tiers of quality that you expect, let's say, and in the same way there would be different tiers and labels for different tiers of products. So it's much. I would expect it's more expensive to have only like 10% child versus 70. I think you should have zero. But in kind of just with this thought experiment. There would be a stamp provider certificate for the different levels of fair trade that you have in your processes, and that's typically how it works in this in terms of climate, for instance. There are companies like Normative and others, right, that are providing information on what is the amount of climate externalities that this product provides, right, and that's a sliding scale as well. It's not that regulated, I guess, yet from the market. There are many products that have a lot of the climate externalities. Some products have fewer climate externalities. but all of that can be communicated to the customer to some extent. I think a big reason why it's not happening so far is that it's happening with fair trade and stuff like that, but it's not happening to a big enough extent, I think, because the government is currently monopolizing it, and so it doesn't let the market kind of. So currently, as a consumer, you used to rely on whatever the government tells you, versus if there was a market of the certificate providers, then you would rely more on that. But I would. That's, I guess, thought number one. Thought number two is you said there's no lower bound. That wouldn't be true. So we still have common law here, right? Which means that which is basically a legal framework based on precedent. So we have like hundreds of years of history of people figuring out disputes. Like the modern nation states are just like 200 years old or whatever, a few hundred years old, but we've dealt with each other for thousands of years, and so around when we've dealt with each other, we've had these court systems that have where people go and they have this dispute, and then the courts kind of figure out what is the right damages, what is the right liabilities, who was right, who was wrong, and so we have this big body of legal code, and that's typically what is applied in this case. So there are concepts like would a reasonable person that buys this product expect that that it includes some toxin or something very bad. If courts through history have decided that no, a reasonable person would not expect that, then the consumer can sue for damages, right? And so and that puts a big limit on what companies would do. So there was one case, for instance, a few years ago where a company had some form of I don't remember exactly the product. It might have been a coffee maker or whatever. And the way it worked was that it produced water that was a bit too hot. So if you or coffee that was a bit too hot. So if you sipped it too quickly, you would get hurt. And so there was no regulation around the temperature of the water. But the consumer took it. He got hurt. He sued in court, and the court said that okay, a reasonable person couldn't expect the coffee to be this hot, right? It's unreasonably hot according to expectations. And so they won the case, and the next day they fixed their product, right? Not through regulation, but through this common law precedent system. And so that's how law worked in England all the way back from 2008, the year around 1080. And that's kind of a way for people and companies to work together without decentralized regulations, but more in a decentralized way where if there's disputes, you go to the court and then you get a case, and then you can kind of align around that case.
Right. Oh, okay. Interesting. So maybe I'm not a lawyer at all, so I don't understand these things in detail. But like maybe can you give the TLDR of like the justice system in Próspera?
So on the base level, we have the Roatan Common Law Code, which is basically American common law, but with some best practices to make it more business friendly. So what makes common law different from civil law? Civil law is what's being used in Europe mostly, except for the UK. Civil law is based on legal code. So you write out what the laws are explicitly, right? And so it can, when you have a new administration, you can change the laws, and it can change quite quickly with the new administrations and new political leaders. With common law, it's much more stable. It doesn't change so much because it's based on precedent. So if we have a court case, the judge will not go primarily and look at what is there any legal code that says what the answer is. No, they would look at similar situations in the past, 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and say, how did we treat this previously, and then use the same principle. And so that's common law is used in the US, Canada, and the UK, Australia also to some extent. And so businesses typically tend to prefer that a lot because it's more stable and predictable. So we have that on a base level, but then if you work in these traditionally regulated industries like fintech, crypto, biotech, then we have this special system on top of that where we require you to have insurance.
Yeah, the thing we discussed earlier. Yeah,
exactly.
Is that like, do you have a list of all the different things that needs to have insurance, or
yes,
or is there like, okay, so there's like a binary thing, either you're on the list or you're not?
Correct. So when you create a company in Próspera, you can go to Próspera and then you create a company in like 7 clicks, and there one of the clicks is like, what industry are you in, and depending on what industry you're in, you either have to get insurance or not.
All right. Dumb question. What if you pick? What if you're like in between, and then you pick the less regulated one? Like, is there some system to make sure that people pick the right one?
Yeah, we have kind of compliance people.
Okay.
Here. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
see. And because you treat like people that are on the island as customers rather than like normal inhabitants.
Yes.
So you can like if they don't agree the with the industry, like if you disagree with Prospera, what industry you are, then they are like you don't like it's not they don't have the right to be at Prospera. Like it's a
Right.
customer business relationship, and you can choose to just not have that customer if you want. Is that how you should think about it?
Correct. So when people come here, they sign an agreement of coexistence, which is basically a contract that outlines the kind of rights and responsibilities of each party. So Prospera being one party and the business slash person being one party. And so, as a person, you have some rights, like you have right to due process, to presumption of innocence, to free speech, whatever these things. Um, but you also are required to follow, the procedures that have been set up by Prospera, and and that you're subject to the Prospera compliance officer and whatever. Um, and so that's all contractually kind of defined. Another cool thing that you have as a person slash business coming in is that you have also a right to legal stability, which is a contractual right to legal stability. And the right to legal stability means that you have the right to always be. We can never change the regulations on you if you come here as a business. We can never change the regulations to you on you afterwards in a way that disfavors you.
Never or time bounded?
Basically never. So we can change the like regulation for others, but if you came here under certain expectations, we can't just go around and change those. You have the right to legal stability, and the same with taxes. So if you come here under a specific tax regime, we can always update our taxes for new people, but we can never change the taxes on you once you come here. So all of these kind of rights and obligations between Prospera and the customers here are outlined in the contract and are made very clear.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. But there's also like another part of but other things change though. Like you also have some kind of social welfare services, you build roads and stuff like this. This could change, right? So your what could happen is that you're not allowed to increase the taxes, but then Prospera doesn't have enough money to maintain the roads. So you came here and then yes, you're paying the same taxes. That's great for stability. But suddenly you don't have any roads. Is there something like that can happen?
Yeah, I mean, but that's also always a risk you have with any contract, right? If you make business with yeah, with any company, the company can always go bankrupt or whatever. Those things can always happen. But the terms of services can't be arbitrarily changed.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I feel like it's been like half an hour now, and I feel like I've been overly critical. I think this is super cool experiment, and I'm like super curious about this. It's just like I want to like get into the details because
Sure.
it sounds like a really important experiment for what the future of I mean the world system could look like. Is that how you see it? Like this is an experiment that collects data for future projects, or yeah, how like what is the like the grand long term plan here?
Yeah. Well, so what we're trying to do I mean, there are two things, I guess. One is, on its own right, we try to become, some form of Hong Kong of the Americas, at least, where we, can grow to be hundreds of thousands of people, and then also have hubs in different places. So our first hub is here in Honduras, maybe the next hub is in the US or Argentina or whatever other country, right? And then we'll try to create a network of these very special zones and cities. So that's kind of one thing what we're doing in its own right. But then we also provided a lot of useful information for other for current nation states, right? They can look at us and see what works, what doesn't work, and they can learn from that.
Yeah. And what was the reason starting from scratch? If you have this like philosophical view that this is the world needs to move in this direction, was there ever like a like a reasonable argument that instead of creating a new city, you actually have to work with existing cities, or that was not?
Yeah. Well, I don't really believe in politics. I don't see a good feedback mechanism. I like if I look at the politicians of today, I don't see them being better than 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 100 years ago. If anything, it's a reverse trend. So I'm not sure why I would look at that base rate and look at, okay, I can change the base rate. I tend to respect the base rate a lot. And then so that's number one. And then number two, also just from a somewhat philosophical foundation, but politics is imposing your will on others to some extent. Like I say, I have this belief in my head, and I will change the system, get 51%, and then change it for the other 49%, and I have to trust that I'm right. That's very different from what we're doing. We're basically setting up a city in the forest, in uninhabited land, and we try it from scratch.
People can come if they want.
They come if they want, they leave if they want, and there's no taxpayer money or anything. It's completely privately funded. If we lose, we only lose our own money and rich people's money. And we don't impose our system on anyone else. On the contrary, people can look from a distance and see, how the experiment pans out. So it's, I think doing it this way is just much better.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's like similar to like Brian Johnson and his like health extremism, where I would never go to that extent, but I'm very happy that he's doing it on him to
Yes.
to collect the data, and maybe he can convince me by showing the results that he get from this experiment. In the similar way, Próspera, you like if you had these philosophical ideas, maybe you would never have them successfully go through the political system, but like if you show that it works, then that might convince a lot of other people to move in that direction, which I
Exactly.
think is really cool. What is the like origin story of Prospera? How did it all start?
Yeah, well, it actually goes way back. It started with a Honduran actually, Octavio Sanchez. He was kind of an economist, and he was also trying to figure out how to, solve the poverty issue in Honduras. Honduras is one of the most poor countries in the world. They have, more than up north of 50% poverty rate, and very unsafe on the mainland. And he was looking at the system and saw there was a lot of corruption, a lot of bad laws. You couldn't do business. And fixing each thing at the piecemeal approach, like one thing at a time, would never work. Like it would take too much time. It would never happen. So he was always trying to figure out how to solve this. And then he came together with Paul Romer, who was this American guy who talked about charter cities. And they kind of came together and thought, okay, what if we make one zone that fixes all of the problems at once? Instead of having a piecemeal approach, let's do a zone where we try to fix it at once. So that was the initial idea. And so the concept was iterated on for a few years after 29 and 2009, and then it passed Congress in 2013, which this law passed Congress, which then allowed for this creation of these cities, let's say. But it was, and then Eric Bremen, is the founder of Próspera, he was actually working on special economic zones in Arizona at the time, but then he was invited down here by Honduras in 2017 to do it here instead, and he looked at the legal autonomy that you could get here, and it was much bigger than what you could get in the US. Because of the law that had passed. So, Próspera started 2017, and broke ground here on the island in 2020. And yeah, so far we raised, I guess, way north of $150 million, and have almost now 300 companies incorporated into the zone. And many of these companies are companies that couldn't be done elsewhere. So kind of uniquely enabled by Próspera.
Hmm. What kind of companies? You said crypto, biotech. Do you have some cool examples of companies doing stuff that you couldn't do otherwise? Like specific examples?
Yeah. Well, so one specific example is you mentioned Brian Johnson. So he was down here a few months ago, right? And he made a YouTube video about it as well. And so he was here to take the mini-circle gene therapy treatment. So it's the world's only, as far as I know, it's the only reversible gene therapy. So you can take it, and it's a gene therapy, so it changes your genes somehow to optimize for longevity. But then if you don't like the effects, you can take another pill that reverses it, and kind of goes back to its previous state. So Mini Circle, they are only offering their product here, so that's why you have to fly down here to Próspera. And so that's one example. And then that's the Mini Circle is the company developing the drug, but then it was administered by a clinic here, the GARM clinic, which is the only clinic in the world that can administer this very advanced gene therapies at scale. So that's another Próspera company. We also have a few like crypto companies doing stuff in tokenized real estate, putting the kind of property registry on chain so it's more easily tradable. A few different things like that.
What is the currency in Próspera? Is it Bitcoin?
We don't impose a specific currency on others, but typically people use here USD a lot. People pay in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an official unit of account here, so you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin if you want to. But yeah, otherwise people kind of choose whatever currency they prefer.
Yeah, and you said taxes. What are the tax? How does taxes work, and what are they used for? And
yeah. Well, taxes is our business model, right? So that's how we earn money, by the taxes. And we have three taxes. Only we have the 5% personal income tax, and then a 1% business income tax, and a 2.5% sales tax. And that's it. So that's how we make our money, essentially. And it sounds like a low tax, but actually it adds up to a lot of money. It's just that we're used to having the government spend, just waste it. So it seems low, but actually it adds up very nicely.
Okay. And I guess then what you use it for is that you build roads and stuff to make people want to come, and that's the business model, that you make services for them so that they want to come, and then you gain a profit on the taxes.
Well, parts of it goes to infrastructure, but a lot of it, I would say most of it goes to more the legal infrastructure, making sure that we have the legal rights in Honduras and elsewhere to kind of expand. And also the e-governance platform where you create your business and you kind of consume all of the legal infrastructure. You do the insurance stuff, you do the tax stuff, you do the compliance, all of that. You do that via an e-governance platform. And then also, sales, marketing, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. On the topic of of legal stuff, there's been in the news that this $11 billion suing of the Honduras government because they changed government, and then maybe you want to explain it better, but they drew back some law that made you not able to operate the way that you intended to, and now there's a debate there. What's that about?
Yes. So before Próspera came here, and before anyone invested a dime of their money in this project, there was several legal stability agreements that were done with Honduras, right? And that those kind of agreements said that, okay, Próspera will, if you choose to repeal the law legally, that's fine, but there will still be a 50-year stability period after that to protect to protect the investments. What ended up happening was that they tried to repeal the law illegally, and that's basically where we are currently.
Without the 50-year lead time.
That as well, yes. I mean, one thing is just like doing it illegally to start, and then also they didn't want to grant the 50-year.
What does illegally mean? They didn't pass a majority, or like?
Basically they are. So one thing is, for instance, I mentioned 3 taxes, and so we don't have any tariffs, for instance. We're 0% tariff, and we have a right to our own custom. But that's been shut down by the government. We don't have our own customs, and we have to pay Honduran tariffs for imports and exports. So that's just like, without anything legally being passed, they just shut it down operationally. They also shut down operationally the ability for landowners in Honduras to be able to incorporate their land into the zone. So that would be the main way Próspera goes. If you own land, you can incorporate it into the zone. So they shut that down operationally. They haven't done anything within this or the current zone because it would be very bad for them in terms of the lawsuit would accelerate a lot, and it wouldn't look good from the US perspective either. But yeah, they've done a lot of things around that. And so the only way to protect our interests in strong ways is to file this lawsuit. But our intention is, of course, to settle. Like, we're not interested in the money, so we mainly want to use this lawsuit in order to settle and get eternal peace. And so that's what the lawsuit is about.
Okay, and what's this status? When was this filed, and how has things moved along since?
Yeah, I mean, these things take some time. It was filed, I think, around 2 years ago, maybe something like that. And yeah, there are several parts of the lawsuits, and we've won a few of them now. But there's still the final stages will be done, I think, late this year or early next year, and it will take some time after that as well. So it might still be some time out. Yeah.
So you should have had zero tariffs, but the last 2 years you have not. Is that
Correct, and not our own customs either.
okay?
And there are other things that the government has done as well, shutting off access to financing in banks, for instance, so we don't get any financing from the banks under us. And there are a few things that are happening behind the scenes as well around that. But yeah, our intention is to settle, and the current administration, they are very, they are, I think, self-described Marxists to some extent. So they are very anti-business in general. However, there's an election in November, and currently the current administration, they're polling at like 20% or so. So we feel very good about what will happen. What could happen after the election.
20%, and there's only two parties, so the other one has.
Well, there are a few parties. There are like at least three major parties.
Okay. But the current administration has low hopes of getting re-elected, basically.
That's how it currently seems. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of like the public perception of Próspera, do people agree with the shutdown? Like, do they support the government in this, or yeah, what's the public perception of Próspera?
Yeah.
Among the locals, I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it started out as quite bad because, again, when the current administration ran last time 3 years ago, one of their three main election promises was to kill the Próspera sede. That was kind of a key thing in their agenda. And so they.
So you're significant. That's like the yardstick of knowing when you're significant is that when other people sue you, and you go even further than that. Like a political party has you as one of the three main components of their campaign.
Right, but what was fun was that at the time when they sued us, I mean, we barely existed. We had like one house here, so we were not at all significant. It was just that it just was a good soundbite for them to say that they're foreigners taking our land. There were all of these sound bites you can come up with that seems that can be popular during an election campaign. So that's why there was a lot of I guess misinformation there. But then it's basically gotten a lot better over time as we've grown and kind of been able to generate more economic surplus. So far we've generated more than 3,000 jobs, directly and indirectly, here on the island, mostly. And that's a lot in a country like Honduras, with a high poverty rate. And so we're very proud of that. And that's also makes people kind of change their minds. So currently we're not at all as that unpopular. And many people understand that it's mostly a lot of information that's been spread by the current administration. But since the current administration is very unpopular, they don't really believe that to the same extent anymore as they used to.
Okay. And do everyone in Honduras know about Próspera, or like how well known are you?
So not everyone knows Próspera, but almost everyone knows SEDE, which is the law behind Próspera. But Próspera is by far bigger. There are three SEDEs, and there are two small ones, and then the Próspera, which is the bigger one. And so
are they all run by like your company, or by the Próspera
three different ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you what's your view on the other ones? Are they like competitors, or they're like companions that work towards the same mission?
Yeah, well, I would love to have more competition and more alternatives, especially internationally. So I don't see them as competitors. They also focus on very different things. One of them focus on agriculture exports, and the other one focus on mainly just more blue collar work, I guess, and just housing, low cost housing as well.
And they are like the Honduras government, are they also shutting that down, or is it like SEDE that they shut down, or is it Próspera specifically they try to shut
Well,
down?
they haven't shut down anything yet. They've just been talking about it. So I've been living here now for 8 months, and nothing has happened here on the ground. It's mostly just talk
Well,
in the
eight
media.
months in politics time, that's like 2 minutes. So
Sure. But I should say I joined on the Monday 8 months ago, and then on the Friday the same week, the Supreme Court here canceled the CITES, like when
right,
they actually made the biggest thing. So I started just before I guess they escalated. But still, it's just escalation in terms of narratives and words, not really in terms of actions.
yeah.
Um,
Did you know that that escalation would happen when
no,
you joined?
no, it was very very surprising. Yeah.
Yeah,
But so it felt like a very big thing at the time. But yeah, we've seen that that nothing really happens, and also they don't have the legal capacity of doing anything. It's not a chance that they haven't been able to escalate, because if they would escalate again, the lawsuit would go south, and also the U.S. would look into it more. Um, so but yeah, I guess we yeah yeah. So I guess that's the current situation.
okay, cool. And so your story is that you worked with startups back in Sweden. You wanted to move to a more free country, I guess, the US. And on the way, you stopped by Prospera to just visit because you thought it was cool, and then you fell in love with the place, and then you joined. Did you like decide to join during your brief visit there, or how was that? How was the timeline there?
Yeah, I guess we stayed there for maybe 5 6 weeks, and I guess yeah, initially I didn't have any thought of staying. I just thought it was a very cool thing to check out. But then then when I learned more, I became super hooked, because I'd been thinking about this for a long time, like a way to create an alternative to the current way governance is provided by government. And so, but I didn't know a way to do it. I wasn't interested in politics. But looking at the way Próspera is doing it, which is like this exit approach, not doing the reform approach, but the exit approach, trying to create something new from scratch, and that was much more compelling to me. So, yeah, so I became completely hooked when I was here.
Mm. But you were in AI startups. Like, why, if this was, because I know, like, philosophically, you've been very aligned with this kind of like freedom principles and stuff. Like, why didn't you do this uh, a long time ago?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know about it until that recently. I learned about it maybe like, I'm not sure, um, maybe a bit over a year ago, or maybe maximum 1.5 years ago.
Hmm.
And so,
Okay.
so I didn't know about it. And then also, it's one thing to read about it, and one thing to be here and actually see it play out in practice, and actually dig deep into the constitution and the laws and how everything works. So yeah, it was just a mismatch between. Yeah, so I just didn't have the depth of knowledge that I would need to get some form of,
I see.
conviction. Yeah.
Yeah. And how has it been? Like, how has your well-being hold up in this commute? Like, because I knew I you joined, you didn't know about this new
Yes.
shutdown of the, or like the law that shut things down. It must have been more stressful couple of months than you expected when you joined. How is it? How has
Yeah,
that played out?
certainly a lot more stressful than I expected the first few months there. But so I had to immerse myself more to understand the Honduran political system, and how everything works. So that was something I didn't expect to do, but I got to immerse myself in parts of that. But yeah, I mean, the last few months have been, but yeah, after that all stabilized, I've now been going back to focusing more on growth stuff, and that's been very, very, very nice, and I enjoy that a lot. So, yeah, currently very happy, but it was a few stressful months there initially, for sure.
Mm, mm. Have you found your life's work? Do you have that feeling that this is like the thing that you really want to do, or
I think so. I think so. I think this is the most unique project where I can make a unique difference. So that's how I feel. Yeah.
how does that? Did you feel did you feel like that in prior projects as well, like when you worked in these AI startups, or is this a completely new experience?
It's a bit new, because in previous projects, it's mostly been like, okay, it's fun to have the ownership, like being a founder, and also great to be able to work with the best people. Like, you can choose the people, you can work with a great co-founder, And all of that was great. But the actual product itself wasn't as meaningful, or didn't feel as meaningful, right? Whereas here, the product or service we're delivering feels super meaningful. I guess it's a bit different in that way.
Yeah. What does that do for like well-being, working on the on the thing that you think is the most meaningful thing?
No, it's super good. I mean, you have slightly less autonomy since you're founder. Since you're not the founder anymore. This is the first time I'm an employee, I guess, at the company. So you lose some autonomy. But yeah, just being able to work on something you feel is super important. Definitely makes up for it, and yeah, makes it more even easier to kind of work a lot and kind of yeah, think about things in the right way.
Mm. I know you also thought a lot about AI throughout the years, obviously, because you've been in AI startups, but also on a more, I guess, philosophical level. I know we have slightly different timelines in terms of like AGI, when AGI is coming, but I think it would be interesting to talk about like AGI is coming. Maybe we have different timelines, but it is coming, and what is Prospera's role in that? And so first of all, do you believe AGI is coming and that will be like a significant change to society? And how will Prospera be affected by that?
Yeah, no, I certainly think AGI is coming to some extent, and um, and yeah, I mean, my timelines have shrunk definitely in the last 6 to 12 months. But I think the main way to figure out whether you think about whether you care a lot about safety or not, but especially if you care about safety, it's like how should this work from a legal perspective, and like how to integrate it into society um, in as good of a way as possible. And so I think with Prosper we have a unique opportunity to actually figure out what the best way is, because we are more nimble. We can actually experiment and also have more incentive to really figure it out, versus these big bureaucracies. And the bureaucracies, they move super slowly. And so I think we have a unique chance of figuring out how should agents and stuff like that be integrated and handled.
Hmm. Are there like AI companies at Prospera? Will you play a role in like the development of AGI or?
Um, well, it depends. I guess there are a few smaller AI startups, yes, like doing smaller agent stuff. I guess on the model layer, um, it might make sense at some point if we have, um, cheaper energy here, or we have, we have less red tape, so you can build bigger clusters here or stuff like that. But it will take some time for that to happen. So I guess currently the comparative advantage is not big. I guess that big for that.
Hmm. Okay. And like let's assume that AGI comes. How does that change how you work towards Prospera's mission? Like if you have some, I don't know, like some AGI just like doing everything that humans can do, does that change how important Prospera is to the world?
Um, it's a good question. I guess you can ask that about almost anything, but I
True.
think no. I think reasonably, I think yeah, the more impactful AI systems we have, the more important it is to figure out and get quick data points on how they will integrate into society. And I think we will be able to get a lot of useful data points from how that works in Prospera potentially, because uh, because we can be more nimble in terms of how the legal framework should look like.
So Prospera's way of governing is is that more or less optimal in a world where AGI exists?
Um, well, if I the way I look at politics and bureaucracies is that they're just getting worse and worse. And so whether it's an economy with mostly humans or economy with mostly AIs, I think, um, yeah, I wouldn't trust the current systems to figure it out in a good way. So I would say it will be continue to have big importance, with like a jurisdiction that is actually that is guaranteed to be free. We have legal stability guarantees, and where things don't just change randomly from one administration to the next, but you actually have more stable rights.
Okay. Do you so in if AI companies were to move to Prospera, and would you like how would the regulation look for them? Would that be specifically would there be some specific regulations for them, like I don't know what the US is trying to do at the moment, or the AI Act in Europe, or how would you handle that situation?
Yeah, no, I think I'm not a big fan of how people currently are thinking about regulating AI. They're adding what they're essentially doing is that what they're doing what they did with FDA and other types of bureaucracies, where they basically trying to add a bunch of red tape and checklists and procedures before you can do anything. Um, and so what that typically does is it just entrenches some big players. It becomes harder for competitors to emerge, and also it creates this adverse selection effect where if you check the list, if you check the checkbox list, you don't really care that much after that because you already checked off the boxes and you have your official certification. So the way we think about it, if we would have a regulation, we would probably require agents to maybe be part of the regulated industries I mentioned before. So maybe crypto, fintech, biotech, and also agents would be regulated, right? And they would require to be insured, and the insurance provider would basically try to figure out what are the chances that there's actual damage being done by these systems. Because again, if the damage are being done by the systems, the insurance provider will be on the hook for it. And so we could potentially integrate the agents into our current, I guess, paradigm of regulation.
Hmm. And so, what if, like, do you worry about X risks of, like, the existential risks of AI as well, or when you say risks here, is that only like, oh, the chatbot was offensive towards someone, or it like made some bad business decision, or what kind of risks are we talking about here?
Well, you can't sue someone for being mean on the internet, or at least you can't do it here. But you can sue for people deceiving others, or stealing stuff or whatever. And I think that would be a sliding scale. I don't believe in this black and white thinking that there will be one day it will be super intelligent and everything will just go to the moon. I think it will be a gradual approach as we're seeing it currently, and it will be more and more integrated into the economy, and we can get continuous data points on the extent to which they are aligned to rule of law, right? That's what we really care about, that they follow the rule of law. And so the best way to get data on that is to actually see how to what extent they do it, and have some very strong mechanism to rein them in when they aren't. And I think that's done better via this free market player rather than like slow bureaucracies.
Right. But like, let's say OpenAI moves to Prospera and they develop some kind of super AGI thing internally, and then that breaks free. All this like sci-fi. I mean, I don't think they are that far from maybe what we will have in a few years, but like these scenarios where the AI breaks free and
Yeah.
basically destroys humanity. Would your system wouldn't really be able to cover that, because like there's no amount of money that an insurance company can pay to cover that damage.
No, exactly. But the insurance companies are thinking ahead, right? So when we have the AGI 3.0 or whatever, we will already have the data points from AGI 2.0 and 1.0 and whatever,
Yeah.
and we'll know what the risks are. And so that what this makes it is that the model developers have incentive to prove to the insurance companies that they are safe, and so this will drive the market towards structures that are AI systems that do respect the rule of law versus not respecting it. So yeah, I think that's the progression we would be seeing.
But there will be no financial incentive for the insurance company to cover the like X risk scenarios, because the X risk scenarios, in those cases, they would just like go bankrupt anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Like there's no way you can cover that. So there's no incentive for them to prevent it going like even before, right?
There's no incentive for them. Well, they have incentive to minimize damages overall, right? Like, and so if they see that there's a risk that they will default as a company completely, if the AI goes wild, then they will not issue an insurance policy. That would be wild. The insurance companies typically have hundreds of thousands of customers. Why would they give a policy to a company that might kill their entire business? That they would tend to not do that, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that calculation doesn't really make sense because the death of the insurance company is not as significant as the death of all human beings, right? So it's
Sure.
like it like the worst case of either end of the spectrum doesn't really balance out. And they have like if they go bankrupt, do they have personal liability like the people at the insurance companies, or they are free from that?
Um, well, typically you have limited liability in companies. However, if you are working in specific industries, sometimes you have personal liability.
Yeah.
So, um, for instance, yeah, so it could be that there would be personal liability in cases like this. I know there's sometimes personal liability in cases of like nuclear power or stuff like that. So there could be personal liability. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Are there any like do you actively think about how to regulate AI if company AI companies starts to come to Prospera, or that is far
Yeah,
in the
well,
future?
well, we would start with integrating it into a current paradigm of like
Yeah.
acquiring insurance, right? And then we would get data point on what are the damages actually cost, and when there are damages cost, you can work backwards and see why did it cost damages? Was it deceiving? Was it, what was the way in which it was unaligned? Not in some hypothetical scenario where a bureaucrat comes up with a test, but no, actually in real life, in real world interactions with people, how is it unaligned, and what does it lead to? And then we can get the data set based on that.
Yeah. If Nvidia moved to Prospera, would they be subject to exports control to China, or how would that play out?
Well, yeah, if they're headquartered in Próspera, then no. Um,
Okay.
but if they're still headquartered in China, in the US, but they just have a plant in Próspera, then they would still be subject. Yeah.
Right. But let's assume they're HQ'd in Prospera. So maybe we should start. Like, do you think the export controls of chips to China is good or bad?
Well, so I think that what people say when they talk about export controls is that they want to basically maximize the delta between the capabilities of the US and China, such that we don't end up in a race scenario. I think that's how I read the argument. But like China wouldn't be competitive with the West at all if we had less of the red tape that we have. Like, the reason that West China is competitive at all is that we're making ourselves much less productive by having a bunch of regulations around nuclear power, build outs of new power plants, build outs of new data centers. All of that has tremendous costs in the US from a just red tape perspective. Um, so I wouldn't look at the current situation and say, okay, the solution to winning against China, quote unquote, is to have less government. But then government typically goes in and say, government typically don't like that type of solution. They typically say, okay, no, let's fix it with another type of government, which is, these export controls. So, I would prefer the government get out of the way completely, and that would completely make China not competitive. Um, but so I guess
Given
that would.
given that that's the situation, like let's say it's impossible for us to actually remove the red tape and get that kind of world that you want, should these specific export controls on the highest performant chips, should they be like should they have this extra regulation?
Well, I think if you look at most regulations, they start. If you look at most sectors or types of regulation, they start with a small initial thing, and then it becomes systematic after that. So no, and I don't think it's a good precedent that we would have export controls on random on specific tech that government officials think we should have it on. The entire things around immigration, for instance. I'm in favor of relatively like free immigration, ideally. The idea that immigration would be regulated by the government is quite new. In the 1800s, people just show up to the US and live there, and it worked great. There was not a problem at all with that. It's just like in the 1900s that we started to think about, no, the government should get involved in immigration, and it's been terrible. And so, I think typically we want to keep the government away from it, and we should, be very careful in letting government into more types of regulation. Yeah.
So like a red thread throughout this is your life philosophy, I guess, or like this is something you strongly believe in the freedom and less government and stuff. How did you come to that place? Like why did Lonis realize that was the philosophy that you subscribed to?
Yeah, I guess it was somewhat gradual. I read a lot of history and economics, and I became very passionate, very interested specifically around the Industrial Revolution. I used to read a lot of history on first-hand accounts of how it was to live in the, in the Dark Ages, or in the pre-industrial age, and it was super tough life. You were working 18 hours a day. Half of your kids would be dead before 5 years old. You wouldn't have any quality of life, and life would be miserable. And that was the case for like 10,000 years. And so basically the biggest question in history, in my opinion, is like, how do we escape this subsistence existence, essentially? And it started in the UK around 1600, 1700. And when looking at kind of what enabled it to start, you really find the free market principles that kind of enabled it to escape subsistence existence and reach this level of wealth we have currently. And so that just made me start to think about those principles. And then I looked more into the current failings of government. There's a lot of failings of government currently. I'm happy to go into details. I mean, biotech was one of them. And another claim that it's a strong claim, but I think it's true, is that governments are currently causing climate change. Again, if you look at the chart on the learning rate of nuclear power, and you look at 1960s to 1980s, it was a smooth exponential. And you do the log. So if the y-axis is basically cost per kilowatt hour, and the x-axis is how much energy you produced, it's called the learning curve. Typically, the learning curve was flat down, right? The cost to produce energy went down super nicely with the more energy you provided, because that's how the industry learns to provide the nuclear energy. But then in 1980s, it shot up. So this graph is basically V. It goes down and then it goes up around 1980s when the nuclear regulations started to kick in. If we didn't have those nuclear regulations, we would have basically cheap infinite energy by now, and we wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem with climate change, for instance. So that's another area where they're screwing up. They're also screwing up massively on housing, for instance. So housing, it's cheap to build housing. We've known how to build it for hundreds of years now, but it's basically been outlawed. So with zoning laws and permitting laws. So in New York today, for instance, 45% of current buildings in New York are illegal according to their current zoning laws. So don't even think about new buildings. Like 45% of current buildings in New York couldn't be built today. And so you see this pattern, and if you pick an industry, I'll tell you a failure. So whatever you look, like the government is screwing things up. And so I became very kind of interested in figuring out how to find an alternative to this.
Right. And so Próspera is one alternative. Do you think this is like an optimal alternative, or is that just like the best that can actually exist in practice?
Well, I mean, we're just a company, right? So ideally, there are many companies that have this type of zones, so we can all compete and figure out exactly what is the best, what the best outcome or what the best entity is. But I'm feeling quite high confidence that a for-profit model with this very strong protection of personal liberties, etc. That's certainly directionally correct. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember this summer you convinced me to read the what was called the Capitalist Manifesto,
Right.
which I guess I don't know, like I feel like it should be called like the free trade manifesto or something like that. But maybe I'm not into politics enough to understand that those are the same things. But as a more descriptive title, I think it should be
Sure.
called the free trade manifesto. And how and it feels very like significant now with all of this like tariff drama and stuff. What has this recent drama news have taught you about, or like has that updated your thinking of this in any way?
No, I mean that's I mean governments will be governmenting, right? So we have the previous administration was terrible, and then we have a new administration that does some terrific things like Dodge and things like that, but then they completely miss the mark, let's say, on other things, and so that's just how politicians do things, right? And that's why you can't rely on them really. You need to have a for-profit entity that has much more. That has two things. One is that it has much better limitation of power. So Próspera as a company, we have a strong constitution here that makes it so that we couldn't be able to enforce export controls because again it would or we couldn't have tariffs because it would break the agreement of coexistence that we've signed with our customers. So we don't even have the legal capacity of doing what Trump is doing here in this case, for instance. So that's one thing. And with the number two, we don't have an incentive to do it because we're a for-profit entity, and we don't really care about. We don't have incentive to maximize for a specific, voter demographic. Typically with tariffs, you want to, you help the farmers in Ohio, or you help, these people in that district because you want to win the electoral college. We don't have that incentive. We want our business model is we get a slice of the overall economic pie. That's our business model. So we optimize for the entire pie versus specific parts of it, like special interest groups. So these two things makes this model more robust versus the current model that you see play out in the US, but certainly also in the EU.
Yeah, I remember when I read that book, I got convinced by a lot of things. Like free trade seems amazing, and all of the like he gives so many just examples of when it went bad when you didn't have free trade, and when it went really well when you did have free trade. I also remember I read a book called What Money Can't Buy. This was like 10 years ago, so I'm a bit rusty on the details, but I remember like he points out like specific things where actually having free trade was a bad thing, and or like where the market didn't work. Could there be like a solution where you merge these two things, like you have free trade on all of the things except like the list that we agree on, basically? So maybe similar to how Próspera has like the list of the regulated ones, which are exceptions. Like you have a list on the things that the market is not free on, and then like for the rest you have free trade. Is that a possible world scenario?
Can you remind me what did you mean that was discussed where they said that these things shouldn't be free traded, shouldn't have free trade?
So that's another book. Like What Money Can't Buy is another book.
I see.
Where
Were there
he
any
gives
specific
a list
examples? What are those examples?
Yeah. So for example, like should we really allow? So one example that I remember is, like I said, 10 years ago I read this book, but one example was in the past. You had like in soccer stadiums, you had everyone. There was just like one type of ticket, and then everyone, rich, poor, they like crossed paths in life, and that was like a beautiful thing. People were like the on the same level, but then capitalism came along and introduced like VIP tickets and all of this, and suddenly you have all the poor people in like the worst parts of the stadium, and then the rich people in the VIP tickets, and they never cross paths. And this, he argues, is like bad for society because you don't have exchange across socioeconomic statuses. This is like one example, very specific. But like if you can like, okay, we're not allowing this kind of things, but all the rest we allow. Is this a system that could work?
I have to challenge that premise. I think that premise is I mean, just on this example, what do you think Okay, so let's say that you have competing football clubs, and in different jurisdictions, and they have to raise revenue somehow, right? And their main points of revenue is the tickets. What happens if they aren't allowed to sell VIP tickets? What happens to the average ticket price, do you think?
Yeah, okay, sure, it goes up, and then the poor people can't
goes up,
even go.
Correct. Yeah. It's so what ends up happening is that only rich people go to football to football stadiums.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's always what happens with these types of when you wish that some things can't be traded. Um, there's this great philosopher Bastiat. He has this book about what is seen and what is not seen. And so typically with regulation, there's always some things that are seen and not some things that are not seen. So when you put a minimum wage, for instance, $20 is the minimum wage. What you see is that some people get their salaries up, right? Temporarily, right? Let's say they're on $17 before, now they're on 20. That's what you see. What is not seen is that people are currently not being hired because you can't pay them $17 anymore. You have to pay them $20. And so that kind of dynamic always plays out when you kind of when you try to regulate the market, because you don't actually understand the second and third order consequences at all. And again, it's not about like, do you trust the and then some people ask me, well, how do you know you can trust the individual to figure things out in the market? When I say, well, I don't trust the government because I don't trust the individual. The government is just a bunch of individuals that have misaligned incentives with me. At least I'm an individual that has aligned incentives with me. At least that's something, right? Still, I'm an ape. We're Homo sapiens. We're not that bright. But what is even worse than being, than like in Homo sapiens is a group of other Homo sapiens who have not aligned incentives deciding over me. And so you never get away from the kind of individual is imperfect. I would be the first one to say individual is imperfect, but you're not solving it with other individuals deciding over you. So yeah, I just don't buy his premise in the least. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And I think I need to reread the book to give more examples that could challenge the premise. It's interesting though with this free trade book. I agreed with a lot of the points, but it's when I read it, like you have like one thing that I think is really unhealthy with like politics is that many people associate with a team rather than the actual policies, right?
Sure.
And so when I read this, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be influenced by this, and my left wing friends they will start to disagree or like me less and stuff, and then now fast forward, Trump is the one that does these policies, and all my left friends they hate it obviously because and now I'm like oh, I'm so happy that I read this book and got influenced by it, because now I agree more with my friends,
right,
which is so unhealthy.
yeah, that's yeah,
but yeah, so I think not associating yourself with team and rather actually thinking yourself about the different policies is way more healthy. What do you do to I guess decouple from associating yourself with a team like that?
Well, I mean, currently the teams aren't that great, so they aren't compelling, right? So it's quite easy to not. I find it very easy to not subscribe to a team when this is the quality of the teams.
Yeah. Fair enough. Don't agree with anyone. I'm a third party. Okay, cool. What is so? Where do you think Próspera will be in 10 years?
Well, in 10 years, the goal is to have tens of thousands of people living here and doing business here, and having generated hundreds of thousands of jobs in the region. And that's the goal. And in order to get there, we have to get more real estate here. We have to fix the political stuff. We have to create the world's best and even simpler way of creating business and running business here. So a lot of stuff to do to get there, but I feel quite good about it.
And your role as VP of Growth, what are your like day-to-day when you're not reading up on the Honduras legal system? What does the growth role mean?
Yeah, well, so try to maximize GDP of the zone, which means bring more businesses here, bring more people here. So there's some kind of just one-on-one business development work. There's also just figuring out how to make our system work better for the people and the businesses. So like, how should the laws look like? How should the eGov platform look like to optimize for that? And then also, how do we find more people, like some of the marketing work that we're doing. So yeah, there's kind of a whole host of things.
Did you ever think that the best way of maximize, like before you took this job as VP of Growth, you had a startup, that an AI startup. Did you ever think that maybe the best way of optimizing growth would be to have your startup go there and be like, yeah, work as one of the startups to set an example, or was it always clear that the best way to move this forward would be to take the position that you took?
I mean, I can have a much higher impact by actually working on the thing versus just benefiting from the thing. Even though it would still be great
Fair enough.
to to have done that as well. But no, this is it's different categories of impact, I guess.
I am very glad that you took the time today to talk to me. Thank you so much for coming on Audio Tokens, Lonis. And I'm very excited to come and visit you one day, which I hope will happen.
So cool, awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Ciao.